I have something to confess. I have been a coward. I've been shying away from a challenge that's been haunting me ever since I first started this channel. Now I already know what you might be thinking. The Ozone on E hiding from a challenge. What could possibly be harder than 100% in Cuphead or beating getting over it 50 times? Well, I can say with certainty what I've been hiding from is single-handedly the hardest challenge I've faced up until this point, and it's really not even close. That is 100%ing one of the best games of all time, Hollow Knight. Now I don't mean getting a save file of 100%, or even a full one of 112%. I mean getting all 63 different Steam achievements. So the question is, can I, a first-time Metroidvania player, achieve this great feat? Going into this challenge, I wasn't sure, but there really wouldn't be a video if I didn't, so welcome to Hollow Knight. This challenge is not just one of my hardest challenges, but also one of my longest. So in order to keep myself on the right track while exploring Hollow Nest, I broke my journey up into 3 different parts. Chapter 1, beating the game, Chapter 2, the Pantheons, and Chapter 3, the speedruns and Steel Soul. If you don't know what Steel Soul is or what the Pantheons are, they're where the majority of this video's difficulty comes from. But I'll go more in depth into those chapters when we get there. First, I need to get familiar with Hollow Knight because I will be dedicating all of my free time for multiple weeks into this game. The game begins with a cutscene of a giant knight chained up who starts to release this orange miasma into his surroundings. Afterwards, a door with 3 masks on it is also shown, but I honestly didn't know what any of this meant at the time. I just knew it probably wasn't good. Dang bro, this guy is tough. I jumped down into the unknown and gained control of the knight for the first time. Surprisingly, finding my first charm shortly after, granting me my very first achievement. Charms are items in the game that you find around Hollow Nest that you can equip for some kind of benefit. Whether that be improved range on your nail, or improving damage done with spells, or doing increased damage when you only have 1 mask left, which is the charm that I just got. I then found the old town of Dirtmouth and talked to the Elder Book, who gave me some sort of idea of what was happening in this strange new land. The truth is that my goal was to explore Hollow Nest and find the 3 dreamers to hopefully cure the kingdom of the infection that is plaguing it. However, I didn't know this. I came into this game completely blind, only knowing this game was very hard, not even knowing its genre. So as I jumped down into the well and found myself in the first area of the game, the Forgotten Crossroads, I knew that I was already lost. The thing about Hollow Knight is there really isn't a set path of progression, and there are many different ways you can end up in front of the Black Egg with all seals broken. That's because once again, this game is a Metroidvania, full of backtracking, utility locked areas, and a huge map. Because of this, my first hour or so was me literally making what felt like no progression. However, I found my first stag station, which is Hollow Knight's version of fast travel, just cooler. I also ended up finding the goat coral by the Black Egg and talked to Cornifer for the first time, buying myself a map in the process, which was a huge help. Using the map, I found the Gruzmother, the first boss I needed to slay in order to move forward, which was actually pretty easy. I don't know why I was expecting to fight King Diceoff for it, but I'm really not complaining. I was also surprised to find a town under the Gruzmother, and even more surprised to find a fly named Sly fent folding in his house. But don't let this little guy fool you. He has a big secret he's keeping from us, but more importantly, he has now opened up shop in Dirtmouth. Then, shortly after that, I found this little guy trapped. This is a grub, and he has 45 other siblings around the map that I need to eventually free for achievements and rewards from the Grub Father, or, as I like to call him, the Grub Daddy. Moving back to game progression, while exploring I ran into the False Knight. This guy was still a pretty simple boss, but a lot cooler than the Gruzmother. I also ended up beating him on my very first try and taking the city crest from his armor. Shortly after, I met a snail shaman who granted me my first spell, and with this new spell, I can now enter my second area of the game, Green Path. Right away, I stumbled upon this scary looking dude named the Hunter, who gave me a hunter's journal which recorded entries on the different enemies I kill in Hollow Knight. As you can probably guess, I will have to fill out this entire thing in the future, but that's a problem for me later. I also ended up making the mistake of saving this guy named Zote from a giant flying bug, which he wasn't very appreciative of, but whatever, I had better things to do, such as fighting Hornet, which kinda was my first tough boss to defeat, and I ended up dying a couple times. But once I defeated her, I found the Shade Cloak, unlocking a new dash ability, which was a major improvement to my movement. And movement is really important in Hollow Knight, as I would soon find out. Afterward, I pushed on through Green Path, fighting another boss, the Moss Charger, which honestly isn't worth talking about, and then found a new area, Fog Canyon, meeting a banker before then discovering the Fungal Waste area, home to the Mantis Village. The Mantis village is ruled by the Mantis tribe, a tribe of bugs separate to the main kingdom of Hollow Nest, full of fierce warriors. Or in other words, tough enemies I had to fight through. This included the Mantis Lords, but I somehow ended up in the City of Tears and the Soul Sanctum before finding and fighting them, which honestly, I don't really know how I did that. The City of Tears is my personal favorite area of the game and is the heart of the kingdom of Hollow Nest. Within the City of Tears, there are two NPCs that are noteworthy. One being Relic Seeker Lem, who trades collectibles found across the map for Geo, and the other, the Nailsmith, who I paid a visit to and upgraded my nail, increasing its base damage. Meanwhile, I got an achievement for opening half of Hollow Nest stag stations, and another one after I traveled up to the Soul Sanctum to fight the Soul Master, where I also got my second spell, Desolate Dive. What's that? What is that? What is that in the background? Oh my god, here we go, dude. What? Unfortunately, I ended up dying and losing over 2,000 Geo while trying to find my way out of the Soul Sanctum. So learning from this, I started to put my money away with the banker from this point on. It's also important to mention that while I was exploring, I found a memorial for the Hollow Knight and the Three Dreamers. After a cutscene with Hornet, it is revealed that the knight at the beginning of the game is the Hollow Knight and he is inside the Black Egg. But that will be important later on. Eventually I went back down into the Mantis village and got around to fighting the Mantis Lords. This boss is really cool, having a solid moveset and being one of the few you actually challenge yourself. Very intimidating to say the least, and a little difficult, but I got it done earning the tribe's respect and unlocking Deep Nest. And yeah, this area actually sucks. It is dark, there are hidden spikes everywhere, it is scary, and of course it has to be extremely hard to navigate. I ended up getting stuck in this place for over an hour because I had no clue where I was. The worst part is, this area is actually pretty important, but without the Lumafly lantern bought from Sly for a literal G-Wagon, I couldn't do any of the important stuff. Instead, all I had to show for my time there was getting the tram pass from the failed tramway and saving Zode again. Like, this guy sucks. Furthermore, if my game progression hadn't already been non-linear enough for you, instead of escaping this hellhole, I stumbled upon the ancient basin? What am I doing all the way down here anyway? Absolutely horrible experience, 0 out of 10, would not recommend. In the meantime, I met this clerk Salubra, and after getting buffed up from her, I fought a secret boss called the Brooding Moloch, which I somehow died to. But it's okay because I went back and defeated him on my second try. Then I made my way up into the Crystal Peak and beat the Crystalline Guardian, who was light work, and unlocked a super dash shortly after. The Crystal Peaks are actually a super cool area, and I really liked the atmosphere of the whole place, especially the music. This is around the point in my playthrough where I really started to enjoy my time playing Hollow Knight, and I felt like I was finally getting my footing. What I liked even more though was getting my very first spell upgrade, giving me Descending Dark, which is low-key a busted spell. When used right, Descending Dark not only does good damage, but can give you a few frames of invincibility, which comes in handy once I fight the harder bosses in late game. Once I got out of the Crystal Mound, I fell down into a new area called the Resting Grounds, where I found a monument for the Dreamers and unlocked the Dream Nail. When I awoke, I found myself asleep by Seer, the last remaining member of her tribe of moths. She informed me of the Dreamers and marked them on my map, then introduced me to a new form of progression through a currency called Essence, which you basically get by defeating dream bosses and completing dream root puzzles. Speaking of dream bosses, I found my very first one minutes later. His name is Zero, and his fight wasn't all that difficult, unlike other dream bosses, and he gave me my first 100 essence, which honestly isn't that great considering I needed 2400. Next, with a newly bought lantern and a map, I decided to dive back into Deep Nest to hopefully get the area over with and never ever come back. While down there, I actually ended up finding a secret area called the Weaver's Den, home to the Weaver Song Charm. Oh, I'm low. I'm about to die. What is that? After seeing whatever that thing was, I came across the distant village area, and after such a long journey, I decided to sit back and relax at a conveniently placed bench. Wait, why are these guys coming towards me? You can't be serious right now. Turns out these little freaks kidnapped me and took me to an area called the Beast Stem. Like, what does that even mean? But somehow this actually turned out pretty well because I found my first dreamer by accident. After I sliced her up a bit, a short cutscene played showing that the first seal of 3 had been broken. To celebrate, I went and beat up my second dream boss, Elder who also only gave me 100 essence. I then traveled back down to the Ancient Basin where I fought a pretty sick boss called Broken Vessel, which is actually my brother, except he is overrun by the infection that affects basically everything down here in Hollow Nest, which is sad. But I did get the Monarch Wings to cheer me up a bit, which is such a useful and amazing movement ability. It gives you the ability to double jump, which is game changing. However, when I went back into his arena and I saw that I could dream nail him, this is where I made a very bad mistake. Turns out he has a dream boss form that is just broken vessel on whatever Sly was smoking in the Forgotten Crossroads. His name now reads Lost Kin, and besides being 10 times faster, he also has this little infected balloon thing spawning throughout the entire fight instead of only when you got him under 420 health. I don't know why I did what I did, but I spent over an hour trying to beat him right then and there, but I was just too weak to do so. So I ended up moving on from him defeated. And to be straight up with you guys, that's a feeling that I would soon get used to. Now that I realized how weak I was, I used the Monarch Wings to travel to an area above the Crystal Peak called Hollow Nest's Crown. I then got some pale ore and needed to upgrade my nails base damage again, but there was also this weird statue of a giant moth. But why should I care? It's not like I was gonna fight them or anything. Sometime after this, I found myself back in Greenpath where I stumbled upon a painter named Shio who taught me my first nail art. There are 3 nail arts you can unlock, all in different areas of the map, and all given by 3 different nail masters who happen to be brothers. Shio is actually a retired nail master, just living his life in Greenpath, and is also my favorite brother of the 3. Funny enough, I actually never bothered to use nail arts at all, but I still needed all 3 for 112% completion, so it's chill. But you know what's not chill? This stupid bug No Eyes. This boss fight I stumbled upon randomly while filling in my map of Greenpath, and oh my gosh, does she reek. Her boss fight consists of her randomly teleporting across the arena while little bug ghosts fly up and down randomly across it. Listen, Team Cherry makes some banger boss fights, but this one is a hard pass for me. Afterward, I was under the City of Tears in the Royal Waterways, fighting through parasitic worms as well as 2 different boss fights. The Dung Defender was my first victim, and his fight wasn't crazy difficult, but I still died to him on my first encounter, like most bosses in this game unfortunately. But one of the bosses I never died to was my second boss encounter, the Fluke Marm, who is the main parasite that has given birth to all of her other baby parasites in the Royal Waterways. And yeah, beating her was as easy as you might expect. Afterward, I realized I was running super low on Geo, but luckily I had been putting all of my money with the banker up until this point. So I traveled back to the banker to take out my... oh no. It had been a while without any achievements, but I was still making progress towards quite a handful of them while I was exploring through this Forgotten Kingdom. And I'm glad to say this is when I started to get some really important stuff done. Inside of Kingdom's Edge, I was surprised to see corpses of bugs falling through the ash in the sky. Turns out that there is a giant coliseum located above the Kingdom's Edge inside of a giant ancient bug's corpse. This is the Coliseum of Fools, home to 4 achievements and a lot of action. Besides being a favorite area of mine, there are 3 challenges that you can face: the Trial of the Warrior, the Trial of the Conqueror, and the Trial of the Fool. Each trial is basically just you versus waves and waves of enemies with a couple bosses sprinkled in for added difficulty. But as you might expect, each trial gets increasingly harder. Also, Zote is here for some reason. Oh, that's why. Before I continued into the next trial, I found this weirdo named the Pale Lurker behind a secret wall. His fight is actually pretty unique, and to beat him, you have to chase him around this square arena, dodging whatever he throws at you in the process. He ended up dropping a simple key, which I then used to unlock an area called the Pleasure House in the City of Tears. Well, who do we have here? Needless to say, I got my money back. Shortly after this, while making my way back to the Coliseum, I encountered Hornet for the second time. However, this time around, she was a lot harder for me to beat. This fight was my first fight that I actually found myself memorizing the run back for, because I died like a dozen times until I ended up beating her. This unlocked a passageway that led me down into the corpse of a giant worm, and here's when the lore starts to really heat up. Inside of the worm lies an egg that has the King's brand inside of it. That's kind of weird. Why would an item called the King's Brand be inside of a giant worm? Because the worm is the molting of Hollow Nest's king, the Pale King, who long ago, way before the events of the game, stumbled upon Hollow Nest and decided to build his kingdom here. It's probably also important to mention that he is the father of all of the vessels in the game, including the Knight and the Hollow Knight, as well as Hornet, but she isn't a vessel. So what is a vessel? What is the infection? And why did the Pale King make the Knight to begin with? To answer these questions and to understand the situation we are in now, we needed to keep pushing forward. The Trial of the Conqueror was a much bigger challenge than the first trial and took me multiple tries to beat. Realizing that the Trial of the Fool would need me to be a lot stronger than I currently was, I left to the Ancient Basin. I then used the King's Brand to open a sealed door to my birthplace, the Abyss. The abyss is full of the corpses of all of my siblings, along with the eggs that they came from, the shades that embodied them, and this weird hostile substance called the void. This area will be extremely important later on, and all that's really worth mentioning for now is that I turned on this lighthouse and got the shade cloak, which was a really handy ability that gave me invulnerability while dashing. With all of these truth bombs being dropped on me, I decided it was now time to find the other two dreamers, Lorien the Watcher in the City of Tears, and Monomon the Teacher in Fog Canyon. And Lorien the Watcher had the hardest boss by far. The Watcher Knights are the closest thing to getting jumped in Parkway Gardens that I will probably ever feel in my entire life. No matter how strong you are, or when you choose to fight them, they are always a problem. That's because besides moving like actual maniacs across the entire arena, once you defeat one, you are fighting multiple at a time until the very end. I'm sure that you can probably connect the dots and tell that I don't really like these guys, but just like the rest of this game's bosses, they got dealt with. I then made my way up to the top and put Lorien the Watcher to rest, breaking the second seal. Next up was Monomon the Teacher, who is guarded by this stupid jellyfish called Umu. To be honest, this boss isn't very hard, they're just repetitive and boring. They only use AoE attacks, and you can't even do damage until the goat Coral comes down and slices her up. Once you beat Umu, you meet Coral by his tank, where he reveals that Monomon the Teacher put a secondary seal on herself. Coral then takes her mask off of his head, allowing us to break the third and final seal, and now we move on to the Hollow Knight. But before I beat the game, I had some preparation to do before I entered the finale. This included me doing pretty much everything else you could do in the base game before entering the Black Egg. I buffed myself up more by unlocking the Howling Wraith spell, which I then upgraded into the Abyss Shriek later on. I also started to go on something like a boss hunt, finding and defeating both normal bosses and dream bosses. This crusade led me to a new area called Queen's Gardens, and eventually the Traitor Lord. This boss gave me a lot more trouble than Hornet, taking me a solid 30 minutes to beat him. But it turns out he was guarding a very important character in our story, so I'll let it slide this time. The White Lady is pretty important because she happens to be the mother to the vessels, which is pretty interesting to know. But more importantly, she gives us the first half to a mysterious charm I knew nothing about at the time, but was still pretty happy to get the Traitor Lord out of the way. Shortly after, I was unfortunately back in Deep Nest, where I found myself face to face with myself? Oh, hell no. Too bad he came face to face with the goat. I then made my way to the Tower of Love, and if Nosk wasn't creepy enough for you, let me introduce you to this guy.
Oh, hell no!
This guy is the little creeper who has been going around and capturing all of the bugs around the map. And it was my job to make this Diddy bug pay, which was actually pretty easy as long as you destroyed the little jars he drops as fast as you could. Once defeated, I found the collector's map, along with 3 of his favorite grubs. Poor things are gonna need therapy. Sorry, Grub Daddy. On the brighter side, I found the rest of the grubs using the collector's map and brought the family back together. After being showered with riches, I maxed my nail out into the pure nail, which then caused the nail master to want me to kill him with it, but I just let him work out whatever he had going on. I then went through the game doing other random quests, defeating bosses whenever I found them, such as the DLC boss Hive Knight, Lostkin, a spirit boss named Gorb, and Grey Prince Zone, which is the most unpredictable boss in the entire game and probably in my top 5 hardest bosses because of this. This guy is literally the manifestation of Zote from this other bug Bretta, which don't hate the player, hate the game, I guess. He basically just does random attacks such as charging you with his nail, or falling from the sky to land on you, or summoning little minions to fight you, or whatever else he feels like doing, all while you're trying to get some hits in. But I somehow found this boss fun to fight nonetheless, and he actually ended up being one of my favorites. I also beat the Trial of the Fool after I delivered a delicate flower across the map from the resting grounds to Queen's Gardens, which were my 2 hardest side quests to complete. That's because the Trial of the Fool is on another level compared to the other 2 trials, having crazy platform changes and multiple boss fights, including a new one called the God Tamer, who actually sucked. And delivering the flower sounds easy until you realize that if you get hit once, it will break and you have to restart from the beginning. This took me 3 tries to complete. Next, I beat another difficult boss called the Failed Champion, which was the spirit version of the False Knight. He also does double damage for every one of his attacks, which leaves little room for error. But once you got his attacks down, it was simple to defeat him. I then got my saddest achievement for saying goodbye to Coral by the Blue Lake. As it turns out, Monomon the Teacher's mask was the only thing keeping him from aging all of this time, meaning that it was now his time to go. Rest in peace, my goat. I also stumbled upon the nailsmith with Shio, giving me an achievement for sparing him earlier. With all of that out of the way, I felt it was now time to face the Hollow Knight. This fight is actually pretty sad, and let me tell you why. Going back to the lore in this game, the Hollow Knight is a vessel just like me. Vessels are all of the children that the Pale King made with the White Lady that later combined with the Void in the Abyss. The Pale King's plan was to contain the infection with these vessels, which he originally did with the Hollow Knight. And this plan actually worked for a while, until for some reason the infection began to escape from the Hollow Knight, infecting Hallownest once more. This then prompted the Hollow Knight to call out to us, bringing us back to Hallownest, which is what we see at the beginning of the game. So basically, I have to put my own brother out of his misery and take his place. This fight is a good one, and the whole time I was fighting him, I was enjoying it, but also not at the same time. It doesn't help that there are multiple points in which he regains control and starts to stab himself to help you defeat him, which made me feel even worse, but it had to be done. Once you beat him, a cutscene plays of the knight becoming the new vessel, and all of Hallownest is saved, at least for now. But there is still one question in the back of my mind. What is this infection we have been fighting this entire game? Once you have the awakened Dreamnail, you can Dreamnail a fallen knight in the ancient basin. This then brings you to the White Palace, home of the Pale King. I don't know how agile the Pale King was, but he must have been moving like a Power Ranger the way his entire castle is straight platforming challenges. But once you work your way through, you then get the second piece to a charm called the King Soul. Then by going back into the Abyss, the King Soul then turns into a charm called the Void Heart. But before it does, you wake up in a past memory of your birth in the Abyss, finding the Pale King leaving with the Hollow Knight as you fall back down into the darkness. And now, the final piece of the puzzle has been unlocked. We can now fight the Radiants. The Radiants was the first higher being to claim the land of Hallownest, who was originally worshipped by a tribe of moths born from her essence. The Pale King is also a higher being, who awakened the lower bugs of Hallownest from mindless creatures to creatures with wisdom, rational thought, and higher self-awareness. This then caused the Radiants to be slowly forgotten in favor of the Pale King, turning her into a distant memory with even her own tribe leaving her. So she became jealous, and began to infect the dreams of Hallownest citizens, which eventually manifested into a physical infection that began to spread rapidly. So the final boss isn't the Hollow Knight, it is her. Knowing that I had an even bigger challenge to face, I decided to fully max out the rest of my stats. This included getting every charm along with Salubra's Blessing, getting all vessel fragments, getting all mask shards, and defeating another dream boss named Markoth, getting me to 2,400 essence, which I thought would give me another stat boost, but it didn't unfortunately. Nevertheless, I felt more than prepared, so I made my way back to the Black Egg. Surprisingly, Hornet was outside this time and offered to help if she saw an opening during my fight with the Hollow Knight. The fight with the Hollow Knight went the same way as last time for the most part, except this time Hornet stunned the Hollow Knight, allowing for me to Dreamnail him, taking me face to face with the Radiants. Hello? Challenge. Challenge what? Oh, I'm challenging the sun? I'm challenging the light? Radiance is a tough boss. She has multiple phases and a couple of really crazy attacks in her arsenal. And of course, she has to do double damage. The most annoying part about her by far though is the fact that if you die, you have to first fight through the Hollow Knight again just to try her again. And I died quite a bit. But it didn't take me as long as I thought it would, only taking around 35 minutes to beat her, consuming her light, and unlocking the Dream No More achievement. This time around, the cutscene shows the knight who perished along with the Radiants, and the rest of my sibling shades going back into the void to finally rest, which I think is a pretty solid ending. After this, I also got the sealed siblings ending for continuing to fight the Hollow Knight instead of Dreamnailing him, but this ending actually sucks, so I'm just gonna move on. Now that the main game was complete, I now moved on to the Grim Troop DLC, which was a really good training arc for what was to come. There really isn't too much to say about this DLC. Basically, you just need to go around and collect these flames for this charm called the Grim Child. Then after collecting your first round of 3, you get to fight the troop leader Grim Boss, which is yet another great fight that I beat on my second try. Then you have to choose between completing the ritual or banishing the troop. Both are achievements that I needed to get, but I decided to finish the ritual in this save file because I'm not lame. To complete the ritual, you once again have to get 3 flames around the map, and once you do, you go back to find Grim asleep. From here, you Dreamnail him, and then yeah. Get ready for a really hard fight. Nightmare King Grim is probably the 3rd hardest boss in the game and is just his counterpart on steroids. He now shoots his bats in an up and down pattern, has a fire trail on his dive attack, and a new pillar of fire attack, and is just incredibly faster than any other boss I fought up to this point, including Radiance. He is probably my second or third favorite boss in the entire game, but that doesn't mean I didn't struggle. Up until now, I hadn't spent more than 40 minutes on a singular boss throughout my tens of hours of playtime, but this boss was just on another level. It took me nearly an hour and a half to beat him once. That is nearly triple the time it took me to beat Radiance for the first time, which is just ridiculous to be honest. But I came out of it stronger than I had ever been, which was important because I still had some work to do achievements wise. Although I already had 2400 essence, I still hadn't fought 2 other dream bosses somehow. Both bosses are probably in my top 10 hardest bosses in the game, but nowhere near as hard as Nightmare King Grim. The Soul Tyrant wasn't too bad of a boss for me to beat at this point. My main grievance with him is just how long it takes to fight him, paired with the fact that you can't really not pay attention because he is so fast. The harder of the two is definitely the White Defender though, which is also a supercharged version of his normal fight just with an extra attack. What I do like most about his fight though is that when you beat him, a small cutscene plays of him reaching out for a vision of his friends in the background, which is kinda sad. But it's also really cool because he and his friends are the 5 great knights of Hallownest, and I really like this game's lore, so that was cool to see. My last 3 achievements were a little bit of a grind to get, but without going into too much detail, for my first, I needed to find this mushroom guy at several spots around the map, which in turn gave me a secret ending where he literally just like flies away. And I can't really blame him. My last 2 both involved the Hunter's Journal, one for killing every creature in the game, and the second for killing enough of every creature to unlock the Hunter's entry about him. I'm not gonna lie to you, getting the Hunter's Mark did give me a mini heart attack because I thought for a second I would have to fight this guy, but it all worked out in the end with me finally being done with all of the main game's achievements that I could get in one playthrough. The last thing I did before moving on from Hallownest was something I'm sure you were listening for back when I mentioned the White Palace. Yes, I am talking about the Path of Pain. To anyone watching who doesn't know what this place is, it is considered to be one of the most notoriously difficult platforming challenges in modern gaming. The Path of Pain requires all movement abilities in the game and spans 4 sections filled with different rooms of straight buzzsaws, spikes, thorns, tight gaps, and agony. The only mercy that this place gives you is soul totems for healing and different respawn points after you inevitably die while on the last jump to safety. However, neither of those things help with the skill curve that you need to adapt to if you want to make it to the end. It took me a solid hour of sitting down and failing over and over to get to the end, but I've seen many people take multiple hours and sometimes days to get through this portion of the game. But it was totally worth it in the end because it reveals why the Hollow Knight failed as a vessel. Because the Hollow Knight developed a bond with the Pale King, meaning that his only flaw was loving his father that arguably didn't deserve it. With that done, there was honestly nothing left I could stall myself with, so you know what that means. There are 5 different Pantheons in Godhome. The Pantheon of the Master, the Pantheon of the Artist, the Pantheon of the Sage, the Pantheon of the Knight, and the Pantheon of Hallownest, or Pantheon 5. The Pantheons themselves are each 5 different boss rushes varying in difficulty. Each Pantheon has you fight a total of 10 different bosses, 9 of which you have already encountered in Hallownest, with a surprise Pantheon exclusive boss fight at the end. This is how every Pantheon functions up until Pantheon 5, but we will get to that in a second. It's also important to mention that there are checkpoints sprinkled throughout, offering both a place to heal and switch up your charms as you see fit. However, the twist is that if you die at any point in the Pantheon, you must restart from the very beginning. And I mean very beginning. As you can probably guess, Pantheon 1 is the easiest of the 5, having you fight early game bosses like the False Knight, Hornet, and the Dung Defender. The most difficult part of course being the Pantheon exclusive boss fight, Nail Masters Oro and Mato. In my opinion, Team Cherry cooked with all of the Pantheon exclusive fights. I seriously don't have a problem with a single one, and I think they are all super fun. This fight in particular is honestly what the Watcher Knight should have been, because after beating one of the brothers you then have to fight both at the same time, except this time around it is a lot more organized with one of the brothers attacking you while the other chills out a bit, unless you get between them and then you get diced up. But overall I was surprised when I ended up beating this Pantheon my first try, which gave me confidence for the second. The second Pantheon's main 9 bosses were also not too challenging, with the hardest probably being the Mantis Lords or the Ooblobbles because they suck. This Pantheon's exclusive boss was my GOAT Paintmaster Shio, who gave me significantly more trouble than his brothers. This is because his attacks were a lot more unpredictable at first because they were completely new to me. But once you start to pay more attention to the color of his paintbrush, he gets way easier. Just like his brothers, I also like this fight a lot, but crazily enough, I also beat this Pantheon on my first try, although it was pretty close. Now this is when the Pantheons start to heat up a bit. Pantheon 3 is exponentially harder than both 1 and 2. Whereas Pantheon 1 and 2 get their difficulty from their exclusive bosses, Pantheon 3 is just more difficult all around. Before even getting to the monster waiting at the end, you first need to fight through Troop Leader Grim, Grey Prince Zote, and Sentinel Hornet. You also have to fight Umu once again, but this time around you have to hit these Umas into him to actually do damage. And I'm not even going to start with how much more annoying this fight is, if that's even possible. Just know that you're either done in a minute, or spending double that time just sitting around waiting to break his shield, just to get hit for double damage because you missed him. The worst part is, it doesn't get any better.
Sly?
Yes. Sly is the Nail Sage. Nail Sage Sly was the first boss in the Pantheons that I took a visit to the Hall of Gods for. The Hall of Gods is an area in Godhome where you can simply practice certain bosses over and over and over again, or on harder difficulties to get comfortable enough to beat them in the Pantheons. And thank God for this area, because if I didn't spend hours of time here practicing, you wouldn't be watching this video. Even after defeating Sly in the Hall of Gods, it still took me a handful more tries to actually beat him at the end of Pantheon 3. But after roughly 45 minutes, just like the previous Pantheons, it was beaten. The gates to the Pantheon of the Night are now open. Pantheon 4 is a completely different ballgame than the previous 3. This Pantheon is completely made up of late game bosses, most of which are in my top 10 hardest to fight. Traitor Lord, White Defender, Soul Tyrant, Watcher Knights, I mean, this must be a joke, right? This is only the 4th Pantheon. And worst of all is its exclusive fight, Pure Vessel, which is practically just the Hollow Knight unnerfed. If you remember earlier, I said that Nightmare King Grim was probably the 3rd most difficult boss in the game. That leaves 2 slots above him, and you guessed it, this boss is sitting comfortably at my 2nd. Besides taking the crown of being the best boss in the game in my opinion, his fight is actually insane. He has a whole arsenal of attacks, such as being able to shoot a volley of nails at you or spawn them from the ground, and dashing across the arena or triple slashing you as he pleases. Even worse, the further you get into the fight, even more are introduced. Once he gets down to 2/3 health, he does this crazy explosion attack covering the entire arena. And once he gets down to 1/3 of his health, he introduces a very quick Void Tendrils attack, also spanning the entire arena. This is all on top of already being the fastest boss in the entire game, leaving you little time to react properly. I spent a whole 7 hours struggling to beat Pantheon 4. 70% of that time was just me practicing Pure Vessel, because no matter how hard I tried, I could not beat this guy. I can't even count the amount of times that I got to the end of this Pantheon just to die to Pure Vessel after practicing him. Somewhere along my struggle, after spending 3 hours not feeling any closer to beating Pantheon 4, I wrote this. The challenge of this challenge is really starting to show. The first 3 Pantheons were honestly misleading. They gave me the idea that this challenge may have been easier than I thought it would be due to my relative ease in fighting through them. I was wrong. In fact, the opposite has now become the case. I can't help but feel discouraged after losing the amount of times I did, in the ways I did today, especially being so close to the finish line of Pantheon 4. And honestly, I am really worried about the difficulty of Pantheon 5. Will I really be able to do it? Beat the Pantheon of Hollownest? I don't know. The finish line feels so far away and I can't even get past the Pure Vessel, but this is what I signed up for, and I won't give up now. The next day, after all of my effort, I beat Pantheon 4. This is now where boys become men. If Pantheon 3 was when this challenge started to heat up, Pantheon 4 is when I was thrown into a furnace. And if Pantheon 4 was when I was thrown into a furnace, Pantheon 5 is when I was thrown straight into hell. Where do I even start? Instead of having 10 bosses to fight, Pantheon 5 has 42 you need to fight without dying. Because of this, each attempt of beating Pantheon 5 takes anywhere from 40 minutes to an hour. This Pantheon not only includes every boss we have fought up until this point, but also 3 exclusive bosses. That being the Sisters of Battle, which is just the Mantis Lord fight, except you fight all 3 at the same time. Winged Nosk, which is just Nosk except he can fly now apparently. And finally, the hardest boss in the game, Absolute Radiance. Absolute Radiance? Absolute Radiance? They made you harder? who isn't just at the very end of the Pantheon, meaning you have to fight through all other 41 bosses including Pure Vessel and Nightmare King Grim before you can even attempt her. But to even unlock her in the Hall of Gods to practice her, you need to first encounter her in the Pantheon. If this wasn't bad enough, every single Dream Warrior boss has their arena changed to its hardest version. For example, No Eyes now has her entire arena covered in thorns, Zero's arena is literally just 3 platforms now, and although I haven't talked much about his difficulty, Markov now has no floor, making his Pantheon 5 fight one of the hardest in the entire game, especially because after him, you have the Avengers to fight next. When I tell you this is the hardest, and I mean hardest challenge I've ever been stupid enough to attempt on this channel, please know I am being 100% serious. So let me break down how the next 2 weeks of my life went while on the road to beating this Pantheon. Wake up, go to school, go to practice bosses for Pantheon 5 including Radiance, lose my mind, go to sleep, and repeat.
Wake up. Wake up.
Genuinely felt like I was stuck in limbo. But let me break down Absolute Radiance and what makes this stupid moth the hardest boss in the entire game. She is now 10 times faster than normal Radiance and has 7 main attacks in 6 different phases. The first phase is fighting her normally, the second with her taking half the arena floor away, the third with her raining nails down from the heavens, her fourth being her first phase except on a bunch of platforms suspended in the air, her fifth being a climb up into the sky where she beams you with light rays, and finally her sixth phase, which is when she shoots orbs at you while she teleports from side to side. But bosses like this are meant to be beaten. And on my 10th day of practicing her, I decided to attempt Pantheon 5 one more time to see how much I had actually improved. When somehow, some way, I actually ended up defeating her. Let's go! Let's go! Yes! 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 Oh, I'm shaking. I'm shaking. I'm shaking. Oh my god, I can't believe I just did that. Dude, let's go! Oh my god! I just did it. I just beat Pantheon 5, man. What? What? Oh my god, I never thought I'd be able to do that. Oh my god. After beating the Pantheons, I still had 8 more achievements to go. Most notably the 3 speedrun achievements and the 2 Steel Soul achievements. You might be wondering why I decided to do the Pantheons before these achievements if the Pantheons were the peak of this challenge's difficulty. But that was no mistake. By improving my skills through the bosses in Godhome, I hoped that I would be able to not only beat the game quicker, but safer. That's because for 2 of the achievements I needed to 100% Hollow Knight in Steel Soul mode. Steel Soul mode is basically the hardcore version of Hollow Knight. If you die once, your save file is erased permanently. So I needed to make sure I was familiar enough with the game to beat it without losing hours of progress. That's also the reason why I decided to go for the speedrun achievements first. For 2 of the speedrun achievements, I needed to beat the game in under 5 hours and then go on to 100% the game in under 20 hours for the third. This was a bit overwhelming at first because there are so many different paths you can take to beat Hollow Knight, and honestly, I don't really care for speedrunning achievements, but I needed to get them done for that beautiful blue badge. After looking up some guides on the quickest routes to beat the game, it was as simple as doing what I had already done before. I went on to get my first 2 speedrunning achievements, beating the game in 2.5 hours, and from there it was as simple as progressing through the game until I reached 103% completion in 8 hours and 23 minutes. I also knocked out the Banishment, Purity, and Neglect achievements during this playthrough, which just left me with the Steel Soul and Steel Heart achievements. And honestly, it went really smoothly. I'm sure this would have been much harder to accomplish if I were to do it before the Pantheons. But after refining my skills and learning how to optimally beat the game through speedrunning, this wasn't all too difficult. However, I did have a couple close calls which definitely made my heart beat a bit. In the end, I got 102% completion in 7 hours and 29 minutes, unlocking both Steel Soul achievements in one playthrough. And with that, after 81 hours of playtime, I had finally achieved my biggest accomplishment to date on this channel, and I couldn't be more proud of myself. Hollow Knight is one of the best games I have ever played, and is now one of my all-time favorites. And I can't wait to play Silksong in the future. This game has so much more to it than what I included in this video, but this video is already too long to turn into a let's talk about it, so I'll leave it at that. And honestly, even after the grind of 100%ing Hollow Knight, I can't wait for my next challenge. Thank you so much for watching if you've made it this far. Please stay safe and love one another to the fullest extent. With all that being said, I have been Ozone, and this was 100%ing Hollow Knight.